you're holding your ground. The guy who jumped out is plummeting towards the ground at terminal velocity. You're going to be doing a lot better than the guy who jumped out of the plane. And in terms of the contemporary American paradigm, he just jumped out of the plane and oops, he doesn't have a parachute on. So that's not going to end well. At least you're in the plane puttering along at 4,000 feet, holding your level. That's what metals do for you.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
So we've been down a long road here in terms of stocks have inherent volatility and risk that most people are aware of that. We talked about bonds having gone to pretty much zero yield, so people have looked into money markets, which have gone to zero yield, savings accounts, which not only are close to zero yield, but they have multiple kinds of risks because the dollars that are just sitting there are being inflated away. It's actually like somebody vacuuming the value out of your savings account while your back is turned. Even though the numbers stay the same, the value is going out. And also, if the bank were to fail, the FDIC, as you said, doesn't have enough backing to be able to bail out, to really stand behind it. And then you've talked about insurance being leveraged through these derivatives and the backside of them trying to make their money, facing some of the same low interest challenges that other people have become hugely riskful. So let's see, what else is there? Oh, the new kid on the block, Bitcoin. What do you think of that as people see the future?
Oh, well, yeah. Another lesson learned, and I and Carl Denninger and other people were warning people all along about Bitcoin. Think about what this is. This is more zeros and ones on computer servers. And the entire premise of the thing is that every quote-unquote Bitcoin needed to be able to be backtraced, through the holders. I mean, it was a complicated paradigm, but the essence of it was that you had to be able to backtrace each individual Bitcoin, which is nothing more than a 0 or a 1 on a computer server. Guys, it's not real. And now what these poor people have learned is that, to quote the banker on the South Park episode, and it's gone. Yeah, it's all gone. It was basically a big scam to begin with. Don't be pumping your assets into things that aren't real and that could cease to exist on a moment's notice if somebody just turns off a server somewhere. This is insanity. People are looking for this free lunch and this way out of this and this magic solution to all this. I'm still getting emails from people about the Iraqi dinar and other scams like that, and I just shake my head and I'm like, you guys just don't get it. How are you going to? If there's no rule of law, there's no way to enforce any of this. When somebody comes along and steals all this, as with Bitcoin, it just all went up in smoke, what recourse do you have? You don't have any recourse. You're still thinking as if the rule of law is extant, and it is not. It is not. And Americans just cannot get their heads around this. And so, in terms of Bitcoin and other products like that, it's just more of the same. It's just more the same. You need to get into commodities that are real. And I am not a metals bug. I never was a metals bug. But it is absolutely undeniable that in times of massive economic upheaval, that metals become an excellent store of value. Okay? Don't be operating in your mind as if you're expecting some sort of a return out of metals. If it so happens that you get some sort of return, that's great. But you cannot approach them that way. You have to approach metals with the thought that all I'm trying to do by holding my assets allocating into metals is I'm just trying to hold my wealth together as much as I can.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to find out for folks. It seems like everywhere that they turn, there's a game set up that's going to steal the value no matter where they put their funds. And that's what we're looking for is what are the options for people to really protect their family?
Yeah. So you have to look at it mathematically as if just treading water is the best you can do. Think of it that way. And then granted, if it so happens that anything you do does actually generate a positive return, well then praise the Lord. But in your mind, you're thinking to yourself, okay, treading water and holding my wealth together is the best that I can do. Everyone else is having their wealth confiscated in all these various and sundry ways by the oligarchy. So if I'm just treading water and I'm holding myself together and everyone else is losing money, then what that means is relative to everyone else, I am generating the best return. It's like skydivers in an airplane. So you're in this little skydiving airplane, let's say at, I don't know, 4,000 feet, and it's puttering along, and it is holding its altitude at 4,000 feet, and a man jumps out of that plane and starts falling down. Okay, you're still in the plane, so you're still at 4,000 feet. You're not going up, but you're not falling either. And the man who just jumped out is falling. So think of it in a relative sense like that. You're holding your ground. The guy who jumped out is plummeting towards the ground at terminal velocity. You're going to be doing a lot better than the guy who jumped out of the plane. And in terms of the contemporary American paradigm, he just jumped out of the plane and oops, he doesn't have a parachute on. So that's not going to end well. At least you're in the plane puttering along at 4,000 feet, holding your level. That's what metals do for you.
So other than precious metals, are there any other options that you talk about with people in terms of protecting their savings?
Sure, absolutely. And granted, not everybody can do these things, and that's kind of the nice thing about metals is that anybody can buy and hold metals. And if you're talking about particularly large sums of money, you can haul around on your back a large amount of money if you allocate it into gold, because gold is obviously far more compact than silver is, and anybody can do it. Now, my business before was, of course, cattle. So I've always advocated, putting money into cattle, productive farm ground, productive grazing ground, anything that is producing actual real commodities. And in our case, you can't get any better because we're talking about food. And food is a commodity that will pace inflation. I mean, no matter what, it will pace inflation, even if you have the market. Let's say the oligarchy in Washington, when food prices just really get completely out of control, they try to put in price caps and price freezes and so on and so forth. When governments start doing things like that, the food commodities will still pace inflation because a black market will emerge. And so, so you're always, with food commodities, you're always going to be beautifully hedged against inflation. So for my guys, I mean, it was always very edifying when we would have this conversation in the schools that I would teach, say, you guys are positioned so well, you have food commodities, you have productive ground, you're just sitting pretty in all this, and oh my gosh, you guys, the price of cattle has just gone through the roof. Just since I went galt, working on a year ago, it was last spring that I went galt and moved into the van down by the river, the price of cattle is just through the roof. So my guys they're sitting pretty, but what I remind them is don't think for a second that you're rich. You're not rich. All you're doing is you're holding your ground. And what they need to do, and what I encourage them, and this maps onto other people as well, is that you need to take that increase in equity that you have realized because the commodity that you're holding has inflated in price. You need to take that equity and you need to use that to pay down any outstanding debt that you have and get yourself into a zero debt position as fast as you can. Because hopefully as people are starting to learn and understand, over the last 35 years, all of the growth in the American economy, all of it has been driven by debt expansion. And this is Carl Denninger's brilliant foundational premise. I mean, he posts that chart about once a week of GDP growth and debt growth quarter to quarter. And the debt growth line since the Carter administration has been well above the GDP growth line, which means that all of the growth in the economy in the United States since the Carter administration has required more debt than the GDP growth actually was. And there was a point within the last decade, I can't remember exactly which year it was, I think 2004 or 2006, I'd have to look at the chart, maybe it was 2008, when the ratio actually got 7-to-1 in the United States. It took $7 of new debt expansion to generate $1 in GDP growth. And just stop and think about that. And think about how much technology has developed and progressed since the Jimmy Carter years, and then realize that even with all of that, even with the advent of the internet and all of these things, that it required taking on multiples of debt in order to get that to happen.
Well, debt tends to feed on itself, right? I mean, you get this runaway exponential growth eventually where you're paying to service the debt, and it's becoming less and less efficient way to raise capital.
Indeed, and that is why we're now in the end game. And what the oligarchy is looking at is they're looking at the mathematical end game here, and understand there's only a few people in the government that understand any of this. Most of the people in the federal government, in the United States Congress, such as it is, it's a completely meaningless body, obviously. The government's been overthrown. The Congress has no meaning anymore. But these people, look at these people. Do you think they have the foggiest clue about any of this? Do you think that these people are even intelligent enough to understand the simple algebra behind these concepts? Do you think that these people could sit down and work through a problem involving exponential growth curves? No, absolutely not. There's a few people, maybe way up in the government, who have come out of the banking paradigm, and let's be honest now, it's all the same. I mean, Goldman, JP Morgan, Citi, I mean, the line between those entities and the federal government is so utterly blurred now that it's pretty much non-existent. It's basically all the same cadre of oligarchs. There's a few oligarchs who understand what's going on, and so they see that we're mathematically probably within 2 cycles of the whole thing collapsing on itself, and by that I mean doubling cycles. And so what they are now looking at is they've got to get capital, they've got to get collateral. That's what they need. And what they're looking at is retirement funds, which are in excess of 10 trillion in the United States. They have been saying for years, I mean, there's presentations by people who are in tight with the Obama regime, that they are looking to completely nationalize all of that, take all of the 401k money and all of the IRA money, all the pension money, and turn it into UST bonds. Well, that's it right there. I mean, you'll never see any of it. And just turn it into Social Security 2.0. Everybody has to contribute to their little quote-unquote savings account every month, and the government will take good care of it for you. All it is it's stealing collateral.
And we've seen that happen in Poland, right?
Yes, that's exactly what they did in Poland, precisely. They seized the private pension accounts in Poland. I believe I think they just swept them for 50% is what they did this last go around in Poland, and just said, okay, we're haircutting everyone's private retirement money, and you get bonds back. Well, let's face it, bonds are trash in this day and age because there's no rule of law. If there's no rule of law, there's no contract law, there's no way to enforce anything. Paper, it is worthless. Contracts are worthless. Bonds are worthless. Stocks are worthless if there's no rule of law. And so that's what we're just into. We're into this phase of confiscation, and it will get more and more bold as the situation becomes more and more dire and more desperate. And so the criticism that I and a lot of others that we get is, you guys have been talking about this for years, and, well, actually, we did see the confiscation in Poland. Well, never mind that. And, oh, we actually did see Cyprus, where all of those people got their bank accounts swept. But, oh, never mind that. You people, just because these things are actually happening doesn't mean that they're actually happening, and that doesn't mean that you're right. It hasn't happened to me yet, so therefore it hasn't happened at all. And you guys have been talking about this for years, and it hasn't happened yet. Well, that's what they said to Winston Churchill and all of the people who were warning about Hitler until the day before Hitler rolled tanks into Poland. Up until the day before Hitler rolled tanks into Poland, it was, you people have been going on and on and on about how dangerous Hitler is and about how this is all going to lead to some war, and it hasn't happened yet. You people are all a bunch of dithering ninnies, and you just need to sit down and be quiet.
Chicken Little saying the sky is falling, right?
Exactly.
Isn't Social Security another good example of facts, though, that if people say it hasn't happened to me yet, it's like, oh, really? Why don't you find out how much Social Security value you actually have stored up in your name for all those contributions you've put in?
Oh, but sweetie, that would involve doing math, and math is hard, and we just can't be bothered to think about doing arithmetic and calculating interest and comparing inflation rates and things like that. We just want to believe that the government is very smart and very kind and benevolent and good, and the government would never lie to us, and the government is going to take care of us, because we are a culture that has been castrated, has had all masculine strength bled from it, and so people, especially men in this culture, and women because they're women, just want to lay back and believe that someone else is going to take care of them. And we just don't want to face reality, and we don't want to think about these things. And there is no greater bludgeon of reality than arithmetic. And so we just don't want to even begin to think about arithmetic.
And it may not be possible to wake up everyone, but a lot of our listeners and people we've talked to are already convinced that they have serious concerns. They're convinced that others are not going to take care of them. The government is not going to take care of them. Some of them have thought, well, maybe the bank is a safe place, but I think we've been through enough examples of showing where the risks are inherent in that. And it's interesting that your top three, if I can summarize, are food, reducing debt, and then finding stores of value such as precious metals. We talked to David Morgan about 2 weeks ago, and those are exactly the same, his top three recommendations. And I thought it was an interesting twist when you talked about food, is food production.
Yeah.
In other words, you don't have to worry about the freshness date if you've got food on the hoof, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of my guys who are definitely branching out and learning how to kill on site. That's kind of a lost art, slaughtering on site, home slaughter and all that. A lot of my guys have indicated, yeah, I've gone and sought out people who have taught me how to do that. And farm ground. I mean, farm ground has its drawbacks. You have to have, first of all, we're talking about a lot of money, because, you want to talk about the price of something inflating since Obama got in. Let's talk about productive farm ground.
And property taxes.
And property, yes, indeed. When Obama was usurped and was installed in January of 2009, there was super high-end corn farm ground in central and south central Illinois going for $5,500 an acre. And we were all just aghast at this. Oh my gosh, that's so high. Can you believe that? $5,500 an acre. Where do you think that same ground is going? What do you think that same ground is going for now? Oh, try $15,000. Try $15,000 an acre. And why did that happen? Because the big, and we're talking big, smart money in both North America and Europe saw what was going on, realized they needed to allocate enormous amounts of money into physical commodities, and productive farm ground was at the top of that list. There have been big money buyers of farm ground in North America, and it's kind of scary, but it isn't just big money people. It's also entities like China that have been buying farm ground in North America.
So how does that scale down to the individual family then? Most individual families aren't going to own a herd of cattle unless it's perhaps a small herd of their own, and we certainly know of folks who are getting small acreages for their families, community-supported agriculture, forming close relationships with good friends in their local community who do have the productive ground and they can cooperate with them and trade services or whatever for that. Is there any other way that people can, on a very household scale, can enact some of these reforms to their own domestic castle?
Absolutely. If you think about that, that is the historical civilizational paradigm. The historical paradigm has not been, massive corporate ownership of enormous sprawling tracts of land. Even when you're talking about back into Europe, when you're talking about nobility and so forth, you still have to drill down to the fact that that land was divided up into small parcels, and a small parcel was managed by one family. Okay, that's the paradigm for agriculture and food production throughout human history. So this notion that, well, it's impossible for a relatively small tract of land to support a family, that's completely fallacious. You have to know what you're doing. You have to have a skill set. But of course it's possible. Of course it can be done. The other thing you want to look at, especially right now, is arbitraging the spread between urban real estate and rural real estate. Let's face it, most people in North America and in Western civilization in general, they do not want to live in rural areas. They want to live in a city or in very, very close proximity to a city, hence suburbia.
Access to metropolitan life.
Exactly. And so you look at the price per acre, let's call it per acre, of real estate in an urban or suburban area, and then compare that to the price per acre in a very rural environment. And what you quickly see is that if you're willing to move out of the urban environment, you can arbitrage and trade out of an urban parcel of real estate and get something in a rural area that is orders of magnitude larger than what you sold out of in town. And if you think about it, most houses in suburbia are built on a quarter of an acre. Okay, if you have equity in that, or let's say you own that, you sell that. Let's say you sell a $750,000 house in suburbia that's sitting on a quarter of an acre. You can turn that into hundreds of acres in rural America, but you have to be willing to make the sacrifice to not be dwelling in the urban environment, which frankly, in a wartime situation, I wouldn't want to be in an urban area anyway.
Well, I think that's the ultimate example, I think, that you've presented of where people can find stability for their nest egg, for their savings. Maybe it really is a nest egg, right? It's getting out of the potentially more hazardous urban areas, getting more land in a rural area where you can have your own food production and also be in a safer location, reducing your debt to reduce your exposure to all of the vulnerabilities. In fact, that's a perfect example of that. If you make the analogy from the household debt that people have been subject to up to sovereign debt, we had that big event recently where Russia basically was saying that they were going to counter sanction the United States if the United States sanctioned them against for their aggression in the Crimean region by dumping the dollar and reneging on corporate bonds and that sort of thing. So pointing out that we're so vulnerable because of our debt position, and debt really does make us vulnerable.
And it must be pointed out that Russia and China are now in an explicit alliance with each other. So again, what people like me have been warning about for years, namely the creation of a Sino-Russian axis that would have tremendous economic power and leverage over the United States and Europe, that's happening right now before our very eyes, and Ukraine is the catalyst for all of that. They are in an alliance with each other, and Russians will tell you this. It's Russia, China, and then Russia, China together in that axis, would then reach out to the petroleum-producing countries in the Middle East. The petroleum-producing areas in the Middle East, those people, they don't care about right, wrong, morality, Marxism. You want to talk about oligarchies. Those are tyrannical oligarchies too. It's just this cadre of petroleum oligarchs lording over a massive, brutally oppressed underclass. So they're very sympathetic to each other. And the Middle Easterners, the Muslims, they will always go with whoever they perceive to be the more powerful, the stronger, the quote-unquote winner. They're always going to go with the winner. And again, what the situation in Ukraine has done is it is brought to the fore and put into stark relief how weak and powerless and useless and unable to defend itself or its allies this former American republic is. And again, this problem of not acknowledging and not understanding that the constitutional republic that was the United States no longer exists. This isn't just a problem exclusive to Americans and people in the United States. It's still a global phenomenon where people right now are just trying to get their heads around the fact that the America that was there before, that was there 20, 30, 40 years ago to potentially backstop or prevent tyrannical oligarchies just rolling over other nations, that backstop is no longer there. Whether you approve of that or not, whether you tend towards isolationism or not, that's not the question. The question is the reality of the situation, that the Sino-Russian axis looks and has now complete confirmation that it can basically do whatever it wants. And so not just Ukraine is at risk, and Ukraine probably will be overcome and integrated back into Soviet Union 2.0 as Putin is trying to reassemble it, but now a large part of Europe, if not all of Europe, is also in play as well, because again, there's no one to stop any of this. So it's interesting days.
That's another perfect analogy politically from the small scale to the large scale of there's nobody to backstop you. You really do have to look after your own yard first. And I just wanted to thank you, Anne. We've really, I think, done a fairly good job of surveying quite a few options that people may have traditionally held in terms of where they could put their savings, and shined a bright light, a sobering light, onto how there's a lot more vulnerability and risk there. There isn't someone else going to take care of you, and given them some significant food for thought and some real sobering options in terms of what they still can do to take care of their family. And I just thank you so much for being with us and visiting our channel today.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity, and best of luck to you in your new endeavor.
If people would like to hear more of your work, where can they find you?
I scream at the internet routinely at my website, which is www.barnhardt, B as in boy, ARNHARDT.biz, B-I-Z. That's where I am.
Well, Anne, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.